Aaron Glenn says he's not decided who starts at quarterback for the Jets against the Bengals, but it's not a hard call. It has to be Tyrod Taylor. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, October 21st, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. On today's show, we're going to talk about something that is changing. That is the starting quarterback for the New York Jets. We'll talk about something that has changed, the performance of the defense, and it's changed for the better. I'm going to give you some numbers that break down why the Jets defense is playing so much better. And we'll talk about something that needs to change, the wide receiver group. It's just not good enough. Jets need to look for additions to upgrade that position. But we will start by talking about the top story on the New York Jets right now, and that is the quarterback position. Justin Fields is just playing terrible football, and he was benched at halftime of Sunday's loss to the Carolina Panthers. On Monday, Aaron Glenn addressed the media. And on the topic of who will start at quarterback this week against the Cincinnati Bengals, Glenn said he was not ready to make an announcement. He said that he needs to speak with some coaches he knows to get their insight on how you deal with a situation like this. And when you're 0-7, nothing you say is going to sound good. And at this point, Aaron Glenn is a lightning rod for criticism. I think no matter what he said, he would get criticized. It's just the way it is when you're 0-7 in the NFL. I don't think that the criticism of Aaron Glenn for this comment is fair, because he did not need to announce who his starting quarterback was on Monday. In fact, the reality that he did not say it's Justin Fields speaks volumes, because up until this point, if he was asked that question, it would be a simple answer. Every time he's been asked this question up to this point, it's been Justin Fields. So the fact it's not Justin Fields speaks volumes. And I don't think Aaron Glenn's calling Bill Parcells and the other coaches he speaks with for advice on who he should start at quarterback. The way he phrased it makes it sound like he said he wants to get their insight on how they've handled situations like this. The situation like this is that Jets are probably making a quarterback change, and it could be a disruptive thing for a team. I think part of it's, how does the roster adjust when you go to a new quarterback? Part of it is, even though Justin Fields is probably not going to be here next year, he's going to be the backup quarterback still. And I think that Glenn probably wants some insight on how do you keep Justin Fields engaged after he's been benched? How do you make sure you don't lose Justin Fields mentally? But the decision did not need to be announced on Monday. I mean, just like looking at the NFL weekly schedule for a team. Monday is not an important day. Typically, guys come in, they, get iced, they get treated for injuries or even like minor bumps and bruises. They go into the whirlpool, they watch film. Very quiet day. Tuesday is the day where the coaches put the game plan together. It's usually the players' day off, where players are free to do whatever they want. They don't need to come into the facility. I think they can if they want to. But what the coaches are doing, they're assembling the game plan. So, in the NFL, you have these massive playbooks. It could be like 500, 600 plays. And essentially, anytime you watch the film on another team, any of the other 31 teams, they run a play that works. If it's not in your playbook, you're going to put it in your playbook. Reminds me of when I was in college, I spent the summer working at this deli/catering spot. And I remember I went over to my grandmother's house. She asked me where I was working that summer, and I told her. And she's like, "Oh, well, the guy who owns that was one of your grandfather and my best friends." So I'm working for this deli/catering spot for this guy who was one of my grandparents' dearest friends. So I told him this, and after that, I was like the golden guy. I was the golden boy. He loved me. So he starts giving me all this advice on business. And I remember once he told me, "John, if you're ever in the business world and you see a competitor do something that works, just steal it because they've done all the work for you." This was the advice I got. And NFL teams do that. If an NFL team sees another team run a play that's effective, they just steal it. They put it in their own playbook. So these playbooks become like these massive things. But of like the 500, 600 plays you have, only like 40, 50, 60, 70 make it into your call sheet for a given week. And Tuesday, when you hear about the game plan, that's what it's all about. It's about figuring out which of the plays are the best for this week? Which matchups do you want to exploit against your opponent? What does your opponent do poorly? Which of our plays can best exploit our opponent's weaknesses? And they spend Tuesday figuring out which, 50, 60, 70 plays they're going to run. Wednesday, Thursday is when you actually practice those plays. That's when because these are plays you may not have run since training camp. Again, you're only accessing a small percentage of your playbook in the game plan. And when you hear about first team reps, that's where that's important. The quarterback has to understand what angles a receiver going to run his route at. Where exactly on the field is he going to break? These are the little details that can make a big difference. They don't seem important, but because the offense is so based on precision, because passing games need to have timing that's so precise, that's where these first team reps are important. So you hear you always hear during the week, this quarterback got the first team reps. That's what first team reps are. It's when you're installing those 50, 60, 70 plays, you're practicing with the first team receivers and understanding how they're going to run their routes. So that happens Wednesday, Thursday, and to a smaller extent Friday. That's why you really only need to know who the starting quarterback is by Wednesday. So, all of this hysteria, Glenn's not naming the starting quarterback Monday. Look, I criticize Aaron Glenn a lot, but I like to be fair in my criticisms. I think sometimes when you're this bad, you get a lot of grief no matter what you say. I don't think there's anything wrong with what Aaron Glenn said yesterday. But what I will say is that Tyrod Taylor needs to start. And, I was watching some of the film on Sunday with Justin Fields at quarterback. And it's every bit as bad as you would expect it to be. I mean, the first sack he took was on what's known as a package play, where essentially he has the option to either hand the ball to Breece Hall or throw a screen to Arian Smith. And he doesn't hand it to Breece Hall. It looks like he's going to throw the screen to Arian Smith. And he just doesn't throw it. He just takes a sack. Second sack, he has Isaiah Davis wide open on a wheel route. He sees it. He just doesn't throw it. The third sack, which was the one right before halftime, was the worst of all to me because his timing was just really off. He did not take a big enough drop back. So when his back foot hits the ground, the receivers are nowhere near breaking. And again, NFL passing offenses are very precise. The timing needs to be exact. And he's ready to throw the ball before his receivers are even close to where they need to get. And that reminds me of what happened with Zach Wilson in 2022. When Zach Wilson was benched after a terrible loss to the New England Patriots, where Wilson played terribly, a lot of attention was paid to this question he gave in a press conference. He was asked, do you feel you let the defense down? He said no. And everybody jumped on that after Robert Saleh benched Wilson. They said, oh, he got benched for a press conference answer. I'll tell you, I watched the film of that New England game. Zach Wilson was just really off with his timing. Right? I felt like they had to bench Zach Wilson because even though Mike White may not have been the most talented quarterback in the league, he could at least get the ball out on time. He at least understood the timing concepts. Zach Wilson's head was such a mess in 2022 that the Jets had to bench him because you can't run a passing game if your quarterback's not in sync with the receivers timing wise. And that happens when you lose your confidence. That's what happened with Justin Fields. I'm not saying Tyrod Taylor's a great option for the New York Jets. I wish there was a better option. I spent the entire offseason saying that, I didn't think Tyrod Taylor was really the right backup quarterback for this team. I think Tyrod made more sense a year ago when you needed a veteran backup for Aaron Rodgers. I think for the current Jets team, you should have looked for a higher end backup because you knew if you're going with Justin Fields, there was a good chance he was going to play his way out of the lineup at some point. You needed somebody who could execute at a little bit of a higher level, and even if that meant a bigger investment at the backup quarterback spot than Tyrod. But there's no real option. I mean, what else do you want to do? Do you want to put in the Brady Cook? You want to put in the guy who's not even a practice squatter, who's an undrafted rookie, who couldn't even function in the exhibition season against third teamers? You think you're throwing him out there with, throwing the ball to Josh Reynolds and Alan Lazard and Tyler Johnson and Arian Smith's going to work? But they got to put Tyrod Taylor in. There's just no question. Now, maybe I'll end up with egg on my face here because the Jets sometimes don't do the obvious thing. But I would imagine that in the next 48 hours, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, Aaron Glenn's going to announce Tyrod Taylor starting the game because I just don't think they have another choice. I think when you watch that Justin Fields film, you see that it's as bad as it looked watching it live. Maybe it's worse than it was watching it live because you just notice the little subtle things. Like Justin Fields just can't play quarterback right now. He needs to sit. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about something more positive, and that's the recently improved play of the defense. And the numbers back it up. There are some stylistic differences in this defense, and there are some execution differences. I'll give you the stats as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Built. Nobody likes paying rent, but if you must, you might as well get something for it. And that's where Built comes in. Built is changing the game by turning your rent payment into real rewards that you can actually use. When you pay rent through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed towards hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But Built is not just about rent. It's about rewarding you around your entire neighborhood. With Built, your rent finally works for you. You're earning points every month on something you already have to pay. Whether you're grabbing food at your favorite local restaurant or heading to the gym, you're still earning rewards. Built makes everyday life feel more rewarding, from your neighborhood to your travel plans. Turn your rent into rewards and start earning points around your neighborhood by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use that link so that they know we sent you. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Go Long. It's not just another ED pill. It's a total game changer for confidence. Go Long combines 2 doctor-trusted medications in one dual-action formula, so you can get hard and go the distance. The effects can last up to 36 hours. That's confidence all day, all night, and even into the next day. The process is simple. Connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online. And if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly to your door. Ready to level up your confidence in the bedroom? Head to rugiet.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 15% off your first order. That's rugiet.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Make sure to use our code so they know we sent you. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. One of the positive developments for the New York Jets over the last 2 weeks, and there have not been many positive developments in the 2025 season, but over the last 2 weeks, the defense has played significantly better than it did the first 5 weeks of the season. Back-to-back games where they only allowed 13 points, back-to-back winning efforts, if we're going to be honest. The 2 games the Jets probably should have won if their offense could have provided any sort of support. And I decided to look at the numbers a little bit, and I wanted to see whether the statistics backed up my perception. So, one of the things I've been saying on the show over the last 2 weeks is that it felt to me like the Jets were playing more of a coverage scheme where they were blitzing less. And that's true, but there's a caveat to that. So I have to amend my statement a little bit because I looked through some of the film on this game and I looked stylistically at what the Jets were doing on the defensive side of the ball. Now, it's true that they've backed off the blitzes on early downs. Against Carolina, they played coverage. They rushed 4 and played coverage 2/3 of the time on first and second down. So, I'm talking a lot about bend but don't break principles, where you're trying to avoid allowing the big play. And the Jets have been pretty good about that. We'll get to a number that proves that in a little bit. But, first and second down, it's been much more coverage. They're not blitzing as much. Third down, though, they're still attacking. 80% of the time against Carolina, they were sending pressure on third down. And, in the NFL, so much about having success scheme-wise is kind of, is kind of combining what your roster is capable of doing with what your coach's preferences are. And I have to say, I think this is actually a pretty good example of that because we know Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilkes, they love to blitz. They love to get after the quarterback. But through the first couple of weeks of the season, you were not having a lot of not having a lot of positive impact doing that. So we've adjusted it a little bit. We're playing more coverage. And part of this just goes back to a lack of talent the Jets have. It was a thin defense to begin with. It was not a defense with a lot of depth. And, there were a couple of injuries that happened in the early stages of the season. Quincy Williams, it was a big loss. You're playing, rookie Kiko Malignoa at linebacker. The Jets now are playing more coverage on the early downs, but on third downs and downs which are favorable to them, they're attacking. So a nice adjustment, and I was critical of Steve Wilkes the first couple of weeks of the season. And I think nothing I said was unfair. I think the defense was really coordinated very poorly by Steve Wilkes the first couple of weeks of the season. Now we have 2 good weeks versus 5 bad weeks. So still pretty negative on Steve Wilkes here, but at least you're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. Got to sustain it. We're going up against our old friend Joe Flacco this week. If they go out and get torched again, then we're going to have more issues. But at least over the last 2 weeks, we've seen some positive movement in the right direction. And for a coaching staff that's really taking a lot of heat right now, and there's not a lot you can point to tangibly that suggests they are doing a good job, that's one area where it seems like there's at least a possibility they figured out how to fix something. And that's something we can hang our hat on, perhaps at least. Another stat I look to that kind of proves the point. Jets only allowed 220+ yard plays in the game against Carolina. So this goes back to like kind of the system that they're running. You more coverage, which means you're less exposed to the big play. When you blitz, it's kind of like a high risk, high reward play. You might be able to get the sack that ends the drive, but you're leaving less guys back on the defensive side of the ball. So if a ball is completed, there are less guys back to clean it up and make the tackle. With the Jets' new approach on first and second down, you're more willing to concede moderate completions. And the idea behind it is you want to force the team to drive the field. You want to force them to put together a long drive, because even NFL players, if you force them to execute 9, 10, 11 straight times, odds are they're going to make a mistake. And you saw Bryce Young make mistakes in that game. He missed open receivers. And some people are saying as a result, well, the Jets defense didn't play that well. If Young hits those passes, it's a big game for him. That's true. I can't deny that there were some coverage lapses by the Jets that Young missed, but I think part of the story is that the Jets were forcing them to put together long drives. And when you force the offense to put together long drives, bad things happen for the offense. Eventually somebody makes a mistake. A quarterback misses a throw, a receiver breaks the wrong way on a route, someone slips, there's a penalty. So I think this new Jets approach, seems to be working. And the third stat I'll have is, and depending on which source you go through, the missed tackle numbers vary, but I've seen anywhere between 2 and 4 missed tackles for the Jets in this game. And if you follow the early part of the season, the Jets were regularly in double digits in missed tackles. So you're just seeing more fundamental play from the New York Jets. And I think one of the frustrating parts of the early stages of this season is that despite the lack of talent, relatively speaking, it wasn't a terrible defense. It wasn't a defense that lacked any ability at all, but it was defense that, first of all, was thin in certain places and had some pretty major question marks when you talk about the safety position, when you talk about one of the, couple of the cornerback spots. You can live with guys getting beaten. What you can't live with are a lack of fundamentals. And the Jets too frequently in the early stages of the season were lacking fundamentals. They weren't tackling guys effectively. And in this game, 2 to 4. Somewhere, depends on which source you want to use. But the bottom line is that it was far less than the double-digit number of missed tackles we were experiencing early in the season. And that contributes to the overall success. It contributes to allowing 13 points. It contributes to the Jets only allowing 220+ yard plays, which, heading into this game, the Jets defense was allowing more than double that. And that all contributes to the Jets being successful on defense. You can look at personnel changes, and look, I do think Jermaine Johnson back in the lineup has had a big impact on this defensive line, because he's at least a quality defensive end. You look at what the Jets have on the defensive line. Defensive tackle spot's not terrible. Quinnen Williams is obviously a great player, and he's really started to turn it up the last couple of weeks. I think Quinnen Williams is now having a Quinnen Williams type of season. The nose tackle spot, I think Harrison Phillips, Juwan Briggs are playing fine. Defensive end, though, was an issue. Defensive end, Jets really had nothing. The only other guy who on paper is a quality player than Jermaine is Will McDonald. And McDonald's really having kind of a quiet year himself. So getting Jermaine back in there, I think has sparked a big difference. And then some of the other personnel changes, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. has been playing pretty well in place of Michael Carter II, who was not playing well. I think at safety, Malachi Moore started to look like a player. We'll see how good he is, but clearly an upgrade over Tony Adams, and a guy who's starting to round into form for a rookie. And we know the Jets are playing rookies, second-year guys all over the defense. This game, there were 11 either first or second-year players who got significant snaps. So the Jets are a very young team. And what you want to see is some of these young players start to shine. And I think Malachi Moore is not perfect. You see mistakes, but for a rookie fourth-round pick, I think you have to like where he's at. I think you have to like the trajectory. I think he's getting better. So not a lot to like on this Jets team overall, but the defense maybe starting to round into form a little bit, and the numbers back it up. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a position group that's not rounding into form. That's the wide receiver group. I've been complaining about it since the offseason. I'm going to keep complaining about it. There's a potential opportunity that just opened up for the New York Jets, a player who hit the market. But no matter what happens with that player, Jets need to be aggressive in upgrading this group. We'll discuss why as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss, because right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, you can try player props, you can even follow the live line during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. And whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So let's look ahead to game day. Week 8 action, Jets playing the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Bengals 4.5-point favorites right now on FanDuel. I'm a little skeptical that line's going to stay there. I think the Bengals are going to be bigger favorites against the Jets come game time. We'll see, though. I mean, there's nothing to really love about the Jets team right now. But FanDuel is the best way to get in on the action. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Again, it's FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. Let's turn our attention now to a position I've talked a lot about on this show over the last couple months, and I'm probably going to continue to talk about it. That's wide receiver, because I'm just so upset with what the Jets have done at that position this offseason. Well, a potential opportunity has opened up. Veteran receiver Tyler Lockett has asked for his release from the Tennessee Titans. He will be granted it. So Lockett this week will be available to sign with a new team. Now, I'm a bit of a skeptic the Jets are going to be able to get him, because if Lockett wants out of Tennessee, I don't know that he's going to want to come to one of the few teams in the NFL that's worse. But I think the New York Jets need to make an effort to sign Tyler Lockett. He's a longtime Seattle Seahawk who had an excellent career. If we're being honest, there's not much left in the tank. He only has 10 catches this season. So, he's not really providing the Titans with great football. It's probably a sad commentary on where this position group is right now that I'm even suggesting the Jets should try and sign him, because like Lockett, there are not many receiver rooms at this point of his career that Lockett could help. But I actually think Tyler Lockett could help the Jets right now, because it's so dismal right now at this wide receiver group without Garrett Wilson in there. I mean, we've got Josh Reynolds is probably the number one receiver. We've got Tyler Johnson, who's a career backup. We have Arian Smith, who's a rookie who doesn't really know what he's doing out there. And we have Allen Lazard, who's Allen Lazard. And I almost feel like I should not group the four of them together, because I think there are two distinct groups within this wide receiver position right now for the Jets. Josh Reynolds and Tyler Johnson are not very talented guys, but they are professional receivers. They are contributing something. They know how to run routes. They may not have other skills. They know where to go, though. And you see, that's the reason, like, the two of them, to the extent the Jets are getting even marginal production from the wide receiver position, that's why. Because say what you will about Reynolds and Johnson, and I certainly have. These are guys who should not be starting receivers in this league. If they are starting receivers, they should be like the number 3 guy in an offense that utilizes the tight ends and or running backs frequently in the passing game. I don't think these guys are better than number 4 options in a good passing game, but they at least belong on an NFL field. The other two guys are Allen Lazard and Arian Smith. Now, Smith is a rookie. He's very raw. I don't know that he's got a ton of skills. I know he's really a guy who has a fast 40 time. I don't know that he's got any of the other skills you need for the wide receiver position. You want to give him reps, and maybe you got something. That's fine. The guy who should be replaced is Lazard. Allen Lazard is now in his second full season without Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback, and he's looked unplayable in both of those seasons. First 2023 and now 2025. Lazard, I think, has one skill, really. That's he knows how to read defenses and adjust his routes. And when your quarterback is Aaron Rodgers, that actually does have some merit to it, because Aaron Rodgers reads defenses at such a high level that he expects his receivers to change his routes as the coverage adapts. When you're playing with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, you're running an offense that's not completely dissimilar to an offensive system called the run and shoot, which was prevalent decades ago. And in the run and shoot, essentially receivers started out any play with 3 or 4 different options, and the option that they chose depended on where the coverage took them. So, if the coverage was this, then the receiver runs this way. If the coverage is that, the receiver runs that way. And you have multiple options, and the receiver had to read the defense along with the quarterback. So it was a very high scoring offense back in the 80s and 90s. Aaron Rodgers essentially plays quarterback at that level, where he can, depending on the coverage he sees, he'll understand which route the receiver needs to run. So sometimes you'll see like the guys who are the most talented receivers aren't always the best receivers to go with Aaron Rodgers. It was heavily commented on at the time that, Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers struggled to get on the same page. Rodgers liked Lazard, even though Lazard really had no other skill sets. And Lazard's lack of speed and lack of ability to do anything after the catch, and Lazard's lack of ability to, win contested catches, his inability to run crisp routes. All this stuff limited what he could do. I mean, he was a guy who never posted an 800-yard season despite having good chemistry with Rodgers. But with a quarterback like Rodgers, there's at least some value to a guy like Lazard. Brady was the same way. Who were the best receivers Brady played with? They weren't always the guys who had the best resumes in the NFL. Of course, there was like somebody like Randy Moss who was super smart, who was both incredibly gifted and incredibly smart as a route runner, who could read coverages and adjust his route accordingly. But you saw it frequently, like the Patriots would draft a receiver really high and the guy would struggle because they wouldn't be able to read the defense at the level Brady could. When you have a quarterback at that level, the ability to read defenses is both something that helps you and something that's pretty important. With most quarterbacks, it's not. And the Jets, with Justin Fields, the passing game was much more simplistic. There were far less options because you're trying to simplify what Justin Fields is doing out there. I don't think Tyrod Taylor comes close to reading defenses at Aaron Rodgers' level either, which makes Lazard really extraneous. The Jets made a big deal about how Lazard was going to be a big part of the blocking scheme this year. I don't even know why they brought him back. I mean, you look at the way this offense was constructed. The Jets essentially said one thing in the offseason and ran their offense a completely different way once the regular season started. And, this is probably a topic for a different show, but I mean, I don't see why people can be impressed with what Tanner Engstrand's doing. I think that Engstrand's getting off really, really easy for an offense that doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. I've never seen a Jets offensive coordinator get more of a free pass for an offense that's struggling to the extent the Jets offense is struggling than Tanner Engstrand's getting right now. But that's a topic for a different show. Lazard really has no use on this team. So, you say, well, we shouldn't bring in a 33-year-old receiver for a team right now that's rebuilding in a youth phase. Well, Lazard's getting snaps. I mean, you can give him the Lazard snaps. I don't know if he's going to be interested. I'm guessing he's probably looking for a contender to catch on with. Maybe there's some contender that suffered an injury at wide receiver or just needs extra receiver depth. But I think you got to try and bring somebody in. And if it's not Tyler Lockett, if you want to say we should get someone younger, why are there not more additions? Why are the Jets not trying out receivers left and right? Why are the Jets not bringing guys in with upside? Look, to me, it's inconceivable that the Jets have not made a significant addition at the wide receiver position so far this season. They haven't brought anybody in to try and mix things up at this spot, and they need to, because the group they have right now is just not something a quarterback can work with. Now we know Justin Fields had issues. I mean, Justin Fields' issues transcends the wide receiver position. Justin Fields was struggling with Garrett Wilson in there. So we understand that. But Tyrod Taylor got in there Sunday, and there were two deep balls that could have been caught. Now, one of them was a bad throw by Tyrod, but Lazard could have come down with that ball. And then there was a ball that could have been a touchdown if Arian Smith tracks the ball better. And that's one of the issues with Arian Smith through his career. People talked about the drops. I think as much as anything, it's just about an inability to track the ball well. I think the drops are a product of that. And that's a deeper problem, because you saw that Sunday. What happened on Sunday was not really a drop per se by Arian Smith, but it was a very catchable ball that he did not win in the air. And he didn't win it in the air because he didn't track it very well. So look, when the receiver group's in this state, you cannot be complacent. And I see too much complacency right now from the Jets, the way they're dealing with it. It's like they're okay with what they've got. And it's one of the worst receiver groups I've ever seen, particularly with Garrett Wilson out. So, you don't want Tyler Lockett in there, fine. But you got to do something. You got to do something to try and mix this group up, because there are guys who could sign off the street who are probably better than what the Jets are running out there, particularly when we're talking about the reps Lazard is getting. So Jets, try and get Lockett. But if you don't get Lockett, try and do something, because it's inconceivable to me that there's been no changes to this group. This is one of the rare situations where somebody you sign who's available right now might be an upgrade. So go find that guy if it's not Lockett. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow, we will try and do our weekly mailbag. Talk to you then.